When people first hear the idea that the Ethiopian Bible describes Jesus in a completely new way, they often think it is an exaggeration created only to shock the audience, but the truth is far deeper because this ancient set of scriptures contains a portrayal of Jesus that feels more raw, more intimate, and more untouched than the versions shaped by later political councils that edited other biblical writings. And when someone begins studying these texts, they discover a Jesus who is not distant or unreachable, but profoundly present emotional-wise and deeply connected with the daily struggles of ordinary people. And in these writings, he appears as a cosmic teacher, a guide, a figure who moves between the physical world and the spiritual realm with clarity and purpose, offering teachings that feel both mystical and practical. And this difference comes from the fact that the Ethiopian tradition preserved books that were removed elsewhere, allowing them to maintain memories, stories, and spiritual truths that other cultures lost, and the result is a picture of Jesus that feels surprisingly alive, human, and divine at the same time, making readers question why the rest of the world never heard this version and what it reveals about the earliest Christian community. To understand why the Ethiopian Bible presents Jesus in this unique way, we must look at the ancient Christian history of Ethiopia, which is one of the oldest in the world and completely independent from the influence of Roman theological politics. And because their canon includes books like Enoch and Jubilees, their understanding of Jesus was shaped through a larger spiritual universe, one filled with angelic hierarchies, cosmic laws, and ancient prophecies that give his teachings a deeper and more mystical tone. And in their traditions, Jesus is not just performing miracles but explaining them through spiritual principles, guiding people toward inner awakening, moral responsibility, and conscious living. And this makes his message feel richer and more layered than the simplified versions many people know today. And when these Ethiopian perspectives blend with their Judaic roots, their monastic heritage, and their long-preserved oral traditions, we see a Jesus who is not only a historical figure, but a teacher of inner transformation, someone whose mission goes beyond salvation toward elevating the human soul itself. One of the most surprising aspects of the Ethiopian portrayal is the emotional depth with which Jesus is described, because these texts do not present him as a distant, perfect figure, but as someone who deeply understands human pain, loneliness, betrayal, hope, love, and strength through direct experience, showing him not as a symbol, but as a living presence. And in the expanded narratives of his childhood and early life, we see a young Jesus observing, learning, questioning, developing, and forming his spiritual identity long before his public ministry. And this makes his journey feel almost cinematic, like a story where his inner transformation becomes as important as his outward miracles. And scholars often say that this human and mystical combination is what makes the Ethiopian version feel new, because it preserves layers of his life, personality, and spiritual growth that were removed or softened in other traditions, leaving behind a version that is far more relatable, powerful, and emotionally moving. The final reason the Ethiopian Bible describes Jesus differently is the cultural environment in which this tradition grew, because Ethiopia never separated faith from daily life, and because their spiritual world was deeply rooted in history, geography, and ancient Semitic culture. Their image of Jesus became an unbroken blend of human experience, divine wisdom, and living tradition. And in these writings, Jesus appears not only as a teacher but as a revealer of hidden truth, someone who guides humanity toward self-awareness and inner transformation, emphasizing that real spiritual progress begins from within. And as readers explore these scriptures, they encounter a Jesus who bridges worlds, who speaks to the soul, who awakens consciousness, and who challenges every individual to rise beyond fear, doubt, and ignorance, creating a version of his message that feels not only ancient but revolutionary, fresh, and timeless. As we move deeper into the Ethiopian understanding of the life and teachings of Jesus, we begin to see how their ancient scholars focused not only on the miracles he performed, but on the state of consciousness from which those miracles emerged. And this perspective completely changes the way his actions are interpreted, because instead of seeing miracles as isolated, supernatural events, the Ethiopian tradition presents them as expressions of a mind completely aligned with divine truth and universal law. And through this lens, Jesus becomes a teacher, showing humanity how awareness, purity, intention, compassion, and inner clarity can reshape reality itself. And this approach creates a portrait of Jesus that is both empowering and challenging, because he is not presented as someone distant and unreachable, but as a guide who demonstrates what humans can become if they awaken their inner potential. And this message is at the heart of many Ethiopian writings, where spiritual growth is not an optional path but the true purpose of human life. And through this powerful vision, Jesus becomes a mirror through which people see their own hidden strengths waiting to be awakened. Another powerful aspect of the Ethiopian Bible is how it presents the subtle relationship between Jesus and the unseen world, because in these scriptures the spiritual realm is not separated from daily life but intertwined with every human action, thought and intention, and this creates an environment where Jesus is seen communicating with angels, understanding spiritual patterns and guiding people through wisdom that connects physical experience with higher consciousness. And this is not presented as fantasy or symbolism, but as a natural part of reality, and this worldview makes the teachings of Jesus feel much more complete, because they show how he moved through life with awareness of forces that most people fail to perceive, and this allows readers to understand his mission not as a set of historical events but as a transformation of human perception, helping people recognize the hidden truth behind suffering, destiny, choice, and spiritual evolution. And in this model, Jesus becomes the bridge between the visible and invisible worlds, offering guidance that feels fresh, deep, and profoundly relevant even in the modern age. The Ethiopian tradition also gives immense attention to the idea that Jesus carried a message meant for all of humanity, not only for a single region, culture, or generation, and this universal approach transforms the meaning of his teachings because it emphasizes that his wisdom speaks to every soul, regardless of origin, and that the inner awakening he describes is a path open to all people everywhere. And in these writings, Jesus is presented as someone who understands the complexity of human nature across cultures, emotions, and eras, offering insights that help people rise above conflict, anger, separation, and fear. And this global perspective made the Ethiopian communities believe that his message was a timeless code for human evolution, a guidance system that teaches compassion, resilience, courage, and clarity in a world full of uncertainty. And when readers see Jesus through this universal lens, they discover a version of his message that feels not only ancient and sacred, but incredibly relevant, expansive, and alive, touching the deepest parts of the human spirit. Another important layer in the Ethiopian understanding of Jesus is the deep connection between spiritual wisdom and practical daily living, because these writings do not separate faith from action, but show how every choice, every word, every intention shapes the condition of the human soul. And within this framework, Jesus appears as a guide who teaches people not only how to pray or worship, but how to live with integrity, compassion, courage, and truth in every moment of life. And this makes his message feel less like ancient history and more like a living map for human transformation. And the Ethiopian scholars preserved teachings that emphasize the importance of awareness, humility, and inner discipline, showing that true spiritual power does not come from rituals alone, but from the purity of the heart and the clarity of the mind. And through this emphasis on lived experience, the Ethiopian portrait of Jesus becomes a powerful reminder that spirituality must be practiced in real life, not only believed. And through this practical wisdom, his teachings feel close, personal, and deeply relevant to everyone seeking purpose and direction. One of the most profound aspects of the Ethiopian tradition is the idea that Jesus came not only to reveal divine truth, but to awaken the inner truth sleeping within every human being. And this theme appears again and again in their scriptures, where Jesus encourages people to confront their fears, heal their wounds, rise above their limitations, and discover the hidden strength placed within them by the Creator. And this understanding transforms the meaning of salvation, because it becomes not only a gift given from above, but a process of inner awakening where each person participates in their own transformation through self-knowledge and spiritual effort. And this view gives Jesus a role not only as a savior, but as a mentor, showing humanity how to rediscover its divine potential. And in this model, every human life carries meaning, purpose, and the possibility of profound growth. And when readers encounter this interpretation, they experience a sense of empowerment, because they see that the path Jesus taught was not meant for a chosen few, but for everyone willing to walk the road of self-discovery. The final reason the Ethiopian Bible offers a completely new picture of Jesus is because it preserves a continuous, unbroken spiritual tradition that connects ancient prophecy, present experience, and future awakening into one coherent vision. And in this tradition, Jesus stands as the central figure who bridges the past, the present, and the destiny of humanity, guiding people toward a higher state of consciousness and a deeper understanding of their divine origin. And these writings show him as someone who understands the struggles of human life while also carrying the wisdom of the unseen realm. And through this dual awareness, he becomes the ultimate guide for a world seeking clarity, hope, and truth. And this version of Jesus feels new to many readers because it restores layers of meaning that were lost in other traditions, allowing people to experience his presence not as a distant memory but as a living influence that still inspires, awakens, and transforms the human spirit even today. In the Ethiopian tradition, another powerful theme emerges, the idea that the teachings of Jesus were meant to awaken a deeper awareness of the divine presence within the world itself, and this perspective shows that every mountain, river, sunrise, and moment of silence carries a reflection of the same timeless truth that Jesus revealed through his words and actions. And because Ethiopia preserved a close connection between spirituality and nature, their scriptures describe Jesus as someone who understood the harmony between human consciousness and the natural world and taught people to reconnect with this sacred balance. And through this understanding, his message becomes not only a path to personal enlightenment, but a guide for living in harmony with creation itself, reminding humanity that true spiritual maturity requires respect, compassion, and mindfulness in all aspects of life. And this natural and spiritual unity, preserved for centuries, makes the Ethiopian portrayal of Jesus feel organic, grounded, and deeply connected to the rhythms of real existence. The Ethiopian writings also highlight the importance of community and collective growth within the teachings of Jesus, because in these texts, he is not only guiding individuals but shaping entire groups, families, and societies into more compassionate and awakened communities. And this communal perspective shows that spiritual transformation is not only a personal journey but a shared responsibility, where each person helps uplift others through kindness, wisdom, and understanding. And this vision makes the message of Jesus larger and more powerful because it reveals how a single awakened heart can influence many and how collective unity can transform the entire world. And the Ethiopian scholars preserved tales, lessons, and parables that emphasize generosity, patience, and mutual support, reminding people that the strength of a community comes from the purity of its intentions and the depth of its compassion. And through this collective approach, the teachings of Jesus become a blueprint for building a more conscious, loving, and harmonious human society. And other unique aspect of the Ethiopian perspective is the deep focus on inner silence, reflection, and spiritual stillness as essential parts of understanding the teachings of Jesus, because in these writings silence is not emptiness, but a doorway into higher truth and inner hearing. And many Ethiopian monks describe Jesus as someone who mastered the art of inner quietness, allowing him to connect with divine wisdom beyond ordinary thought. And through this lens, his teachings become not only external instructions but internal experiences that unfold in the quiet spaces of the heart. And this emphasis on inner stillness aligns perfectly with the idea that spiritual awakening is not something forced but something revealed through presence, awareness, and deep observation. And when readers explore this interpretation, they realize that understanding Jesus requires not only learning his words but also entering the same inner state from which he spoke. And this makes the Ethiopian portrayal feel profound, peaceful, and transformative, offering a path that guides the seeker into a more awakened and centered life. Another significant theme in the Ethiopian understanding of Jesus is the idea that spiritual knowledge must always be balanced with compassion, because wisdom without kindness becomes empty, and kindness without wisdom becomes blind. And in this tradition, Jesus is shown as the perfect example of this balance. A teacher who understood both the depths of divine truth and the struggles of ordinary human life, and through this harmony, he was able to reach every kind of person, whether poor, wealthy, hurting, hopeful, confused, or seeking. And the Ethiopian writings preserve many teachings that highlight this balance, showing Jesus guiding people with gentleness, yet speaking with a strength that awakened their soul. And this image creates a Jesus who is not only wise and powerful, but also warm, nurturing, and deeply committed to lifting others out of fear, guilt, and sorrow. And through this compassionate wisdom, the Ethiopian portrayal reveals a version of Jesus who touches the heart and stays with the reader long after the pages have closed. In the Ethiopian tradition, the journey of Jesus is also described as a path of courageous truth, where he fearlessly confronted injustice, corruption, and spiritual blindness, while still offering love, forgiveness, and understanding to those willing to change. And this portrayal shows that his mission was not only about performing miracles or teaching parables, but about challenging the structures that harmed humanity and awakening people to a higher sense of responsibility, integrity, and moral clarity. And through this courageous approach, the Ethiopian writings show Jesus as a figure who stands firmly for justice while guiding people toward inner transformation. And this combination creates a heroic yet deeply relatable image of him, someone who faced suffering but never abandoned compassion, someone who walked through danger but never lost his purpose, and this makes the Ethiopian vision of Jesus feel powerful, inspiring, and timeless, giving readers a sense of strength and direction for their own lives. Page 16. Another powerful element in the Ethiopian texts is the emphasis on the inner light that Jesus believed every person carries within them, a hidden brightness placed there by the Creator from the beginning of time, and in these writings, Jesus is shown helping people discover this inner light, teaching that true spiritual growth does not come from external authority but from awakening what already rests inside the human soul, and this message transforms the way people understand faith because it becomes a journey of remembering, rediscovering, and reconnecting with their own divine essence. And the Ethiopian tradition preserves many teachings, stories, and spiritual practices that guide the seeker toward this inner illumination, encouraging silence, reflection, compassion, self-awareness, and the courage to face one's own shadows. And through this journey, the portrayal of Jesus becomes not only a historical figure but a living guide leading each person toward the highest version of themselves, and this makes the Ethiopian understanding deeply uplifting, empowering, and transformative.